And g'day there. My name is Ozzy Stern, a country Victorian gamer of Star Wars Armada, Star Wars Legion, and many other games including Flames of War, Dystopian Wars, etc. Today I am showing off my progress with my Leia and Chewbacca and doing a little bit more painting. So starting off with Leia, as you can see, I've already done the hair and her coat and gun now. With Chewie, I've also done some highlights of the monster brown on him, or beige brown. Both of them are very similar colour on Chewie's face, and we'll be also doing some more highlights throughout the night tonight, doing a bit more fine details in the area. I'm also intending to do a bit more on Princess Leia, as well as to go and do the bowcaster on Chewie. With that said, please like and subscribe, and on to getting some paint on. So firstly, we're just going to get a little bit of the beige brown, lightly applying it onto a piece of paper, getting the dry brush, and very much flaking it, getting as much of the wet paint off the dry brush as possible, and then just skimming it over the surface. We don't want a thick coat at all. We just want a very light coat on the model, just to bring out those raised areas. Having already the oak brown in the recesses will give a shadow effect to the model. So working from one direction, going from the main body down to the legs, just carefully following through where the body is will help. Making sure that we don't put too much paint on it at any one time, and constantly going back, smoothing off any paint from that brush before we go back and doing a bit more. Now we're lightening up around the facial area. Now that's going to be very important, because naturally that's where most people look at, is at the head area. Now, once this is done, what I'll do is I'll set it aside, let it dry, and then move on to Leia. Now, this will take a little bit of time just to apply. And each time I'm applying a little bit more of that paint, or adding a little bit more white to that colour, to progressively making it lighter and lighter. I don't want to go for a full white though, because obviously this is Chewie in his prime. We want to keep as much of the light brown coloration as possible. If, however, I do accidentally put too much paint on it, it's not too much of a problem. Just by either recoating the area with the oak brown, or alternatively quickly drying that dry brush and using it to wipe away as much of that paint as possible, soaking it back up and into the paintbrush. Other alternatives you can use would be like a bit of paper or blotting paper, just to dab the area to soak it up as best as possible before using the dry brush to spread it out yet again. Now you'll notice that the bases haven't been painted as yet for either of these. I do find it easier to paint the bases after I have painted all the model. But right about now, we look to be pretty much finished with Chewie by himself. The main body area. Yeah. Now, some people will go and say, bring in a fine brush and actually manually do those highlights. I find that can be quite a long process, and I'm not the best painter for that. But I think this is getting pretty good, and it'll mean that when I start putting a wash through the area around his beard, that should really accent the model itself. With Leia, we're just going to be using the browns in her hair just as a highlight, just to sort of very gently bring out more of a glow or showing various shadings in her hair. So we don't need to do too much. As always, making sure that you just very, very lightly have not as much paint on that brush when you're dry brushing, and just very quickly just flicking it away from the model, sort of thing, not down into the model, just flick it away. As you can see, I've already done her eyebrows in the same brown, and she is pretty much ready for eyeballs as well. For the colour of the eyes, I'm going to use that oak brown, very dark brown coloration. And as you can see, it's quite difficult to do eyeballs of any type. I just get a very, very small brush and just very lightly just dab it on the very, very center, and very carefully trying to not spread it too much, making sure that it's looking in many ways in the direction that I want it to be. In this case, looking pretty much straight towards the camera. Sometimes you can fudge the actual image of doing the eyes by using washes. But in this case, I wanted to make sure that it's pretty good and use the brown color. Now, I'm going back and using a bit of that flat flesh, just to close up around her eye, and also to clean up any flecks of the brown that may have gone over the hair onto more of her face area. So just tidying up, cleaning it up a little bit, and that looks pretty good. At this point, I want to add a little bit of color to her lips. Not a heavy color, just a light color. So I want to create a very light pink. So grabbing a bit of the red color that I have, of bloody red, and mixing in quite a lot of the white, I want to generate a very light pink coloration to apply. My ratios is around about 1:5 of red to dead white, and that's creating a lovely light pink. It's not a very strong pink, and as you can see shortly when I start applying it, you won't even notice the coloration from a distance. It's more so when you have it up close that you'll see it more so. You'll also, even if you look at yourself in a mirror, you'll notice that the coloration around your mouth area is usually of a different color. Obviously, quite a lot of people wear different types of makeup on their mouth area. So having that little bit of colour around her lips just will give it a little bit of a gloss or a very soft glow. So you'll see that I bring it very up close to where I'm trying to do it, and just very lightly applying it on the lips itself. This will also help to actually donate or show off where that slight slip of the mouth is on the model without having to resort to doing things like a lot of shading in that area. And as you can see, it's not very noticeable right now. I am going to go back and use a bit of that flat flesh to just clean it up around the edges a bit more and make it smooth in so it's not so... It doesn't look so much like a smile from the Joker, but more so a normal smile. So I do apologise for this, for putting my hand pretty much in the way. But as you can see, it takes a bit to get the right angle for those paint brushes to occur. And there you have it. Just do a little bit on the chin area and on the cheek, but other than that, that looks pretty good. Yeah. So I still have the gun to go, and also Chewie's arms to go. That will be the next thing. And even just sitting there looking from a distance, you can't even notice the pink on the lips. It's more so when you really deep dive into the model that you'll actually see that pink colour come out. Yeah. So let's put her aside and let's go on to the bowcaster. Now, obviously I've already dried brushed the main Chewie, and I want to continue this idea of dry brushing onto his arms, getting into all the recesses. So using a bit more of that beige brown, I'm just going to dry brush his arms, just very lightly along the surfaces, and then start moving it around to do his other arm. Again, using a piece of paper or a rag or something or other, just to wipe off as much of that dry brush as possible, so that there is very little paint left. Now I want to do the inside of the arms as well, even though we may not see them as well as the outside of the arms. And we want to do as close as possible to the actual arm socket area, because once it's glued in, I won't be able to access those areas if I need to do any touch-ups. I have pre-checked this yet again at this point after I've painted the arms to make sure that the actual arms will fit into Chewie, and I want to be able to do that without bending the model in any way. At this point, I'm now going to go back to Chewy and just grab a very fine brush and do a little bit more of those highlights just around the beard area, using the flat of the brush rather than the actual point or even the main body of the brush, to lightly downstroke vertically rather than going with the actual brush itself, to try and capture some of the more highlighted or the more raised areas in a slightly lighter color yet again. Now I'm only going to do this for the likes of the head area, which should hopefully make it stand out a bit more. Like using a dry brush, I'm using the same technique of very much putting a little bit paint on it, but then wiping off as much of the paint as possible from the brush before I continue on. And there we have it, looking pretty good. At this point, I'm going to do the eyes of Chewbacca, and for this I'm just going to use, like Leia, a very small brush and applying some black into the eye socket recesses. Always taking care to just keeping your hand steady as possible while doing it, and also ensuring that the black doesn't smudge too much into the rest of the body of the model. Obviously, I'm going to have to come back and do a little bit of cleaning around that eyeball anyway, with some of that oak brown, just to clean it up ever so slightly, as I unfortunately did splodge that right eye a little bit more than I would like. But other than that, you can see that the highlighting is really showing off the individual fur. You can see that the bandolier has had a little bit of the brown added to it, but I will be going back and cleaning that probably after it's dried a bit more. As you can see, now I'm applying that oak brown around his eyes just to clear it up a little bit. And get rid of some of that black paint. In some ways, you can wait until that black paint dries. I sometimes like to try and do it while it's still quite fresh, because in that way, the black and the brown blends a little bit better around that eye. And of course, seeing I'm using very light paint, it pretty much gets dried quite quickly, even if I just sort of put a very small amount on. It really depends on the weather that you have in here. Always remember, when you're adding a base color back into a model that you've just highlighted, you'll need to blend it in ever so slightly to the rest of the area. Obviously, I want to clean up some of those raised areas like the nose, eyebrow area, or the forehead area and the eye socket area, to continue to have that darker brown look. I won't need to do it as much for the mouth. In this case, I could have used that same pink colour for the inside of Chewie's mouth, but I felt more so, seeing he's got the mouth closed at the moment, just having it as a natural shadow is probably going to be better. And there we go for now. With Chewie and Leia down, let's get on to doing one of the final sections. We're going to paint the guns warp lock bronze. We want to make sure that the brush has a nice, good consistency colour for the warp lock bronze, because it does have a suspended oily colour with bronze inside of it. So we test it a little bit and make sure that it has the consistency that we want. And then we'll start painting it more so in the body of the model. In this case, it looks pretty good. It hasn't separated out too much. I want to take care not to paint too close to his Chewie's hands. And as you'll see, I'll be constantly moving it around just so that the full colour of the warp lock bronze goes onto all the surfaces. Now, I've used this colour for almost every single weapon that I have had so far from Star Wars Legion. And probably I will continue to use it for almost every weapon. I doubt that there will be much in the way of a variant colour that I would use. Maybe for a commando sniper. But I do like this coloration of this black with a bit of bronze tinge. It just makes it look like a powder-coated metallic gun. I want to make sure that I cover all the different surfaces. And that can be a bit difficult for some weapons. Obviously, with most flat weapons, it's easy, but when you've got it a bit more in 3 dimensions, as well as in trying to ensure that you're painting in a nice, flat or not clumpy way, we also want to make sure that you, the viewer, don't get bored from some of this process. So I'm fast tracking a little bit more. Now you can see that the actual stock of the weapon is very close to his fur as well. So I'm just going to use a very light brush and very light touching it to paint those areas. As I've said in the previous video, the actual images from A New Hope has that weapon as a non-solid stock or a bare metal stock, and I will be following through with that idea. Obviously, some of the stock has been covered because of the fur, so I just want to take a look at it from a different angle, make sure that I've got all the sections of that stock. I've got very little in the way left to do of Chewie. And then I'll start putting the same coloration on Leia's weapon with this same colour while I'm at it. Yeah. That's looking pretty good, I think. Yeah. Now, I'll do the claws of Chewie in a bit of a black coloration, using either some oil or some just black matte paint. I'm also going to be doing some of his toenails in that black as well. Very lightly, so you can still see the actual colour of the fur through it in some ways. Just because I noticed a few bits and pieces that haven't been coloured that bronze brown. Warp lock bronze, gone back, painted it a bit more. Just finalising a little bit of some of the touch-ups. And then we'll make a start on the next model. So here's Leia. Nice, good pose for the weapon. It's not too close to the actual body of the model itself. We just want to do a little bit of the handle, that trigger guard that's on it, and then move on to the main body. It's a very small weapon. I believe it's a sporting blaster. Although the dynamic look of the model itself does reminisce me the likes of Pierce Brosnan's James Bond, that silencer that he has in, I think, Tomorrow Never Dies. Or almost in any of the James Bond movies. But turning the model over, just lightly painting it, taking care to make sure that it's nicely coated, and doing that little section on the actual handle and also on the gun tip. And here we have the completed model so far. I still have to do some flesh washes and also some varnishing on both models, also the base plate. But for now, thank you. Please like, subscribe, and I will catch you on the table next time. Bye.